Let's start with the sketching and getting into some relations. So if I go to the new, and there are the templates we made in the previous video. If you haven't made those yet, then you will see the part. If you've made those, go ahead and use one. I'm going to go into the part just to kind of illustrate some of the differences. So again, the gradient background is okay, not my preference. Some of the things that changed that I did not save to the document, the direct editing tab was a system option and didn't necessarily have to travel with the document template or the part template. So if we go into a sketch, my preference is going to be, and I'm going to be pretty consistent about this, picking a plane and right-clicking and going to the sketch. There's a lot of right mouse button in context pop-up functionality here to work with. If you are more comfortable with the sketch, it's going to ask you, it's going to show you, and then it's going to ask you which plane you want to start the sketch on. And both of those work fine, and you'll need to pick one. But in the videos, I'm going to predominantly right-click and select on the plane or the face that I want to be in. So a relation, a geometric constraint, really comes down to what we what we're drawing and what we want to work with. So we don't do points very often, but we'll start there just as if I put a point in place, the point's able to orbit and move, but it is only in this front plane. So if I left click and drag and get it close, we're going to see it make that little jump, and that is our first relation, is coincident. So the coincident shows up over here, the little green box. We turned off the sketch relations. If I wanted to see all of them all of the time, I would leave that on, but I'm going to say go ahead and turn that off. So only when you pick on your object geometry that does it show up. So a line has two endpoints, and my sketch numeric input is turned on. So we're going to check this for Windows 11 right now. Oh, maybe not. I forgot to put in the number. So in the options, I told it I only want it to put that value in if I've entered a number. So once I say 75 and select, and we right click. All right, so just off of the screen, let me put that up a little bit, is if this was checked, this would be a driven dimension. And a driven dimension is a problem because it is not changeable. Right, so we have driving dimensions, and most of our dimensions are going to be driving. So the main difference here is that the extension lines are kind of in a dark black. If that was light gray, and the checkbox for the driven, let's just go ahead and pull that back up, and we'll set it to driven just to get this out of the way. So it goes to a lighter gray, and if I double click on it, it says you have a driven dimension, the value cannot be changed. All right, so apparently it was corrected in this Service Pack 3, so I will kind of let that go. But if you have a previous Service Pack where you're seeing that show up, we're going to right click and turn off the sketch numeric input. You can work either way. It's fine. You are determining your workflow at this point. And so just to start off with, I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off. When we talk about the toggles, notice that this has a clear or the same background color. When I toggle it on, it is now active and it has kind of a gray background. And that's going to be anywhere there's a little box on the screen, things that you might want to select or change, those become active or are a reversing element or do something to the object. So when I click on this line, we get a sketch relation box that is showing as horizontal. In the property manager over here on the left, we have horizontal 1, and over here we have horizontal 0. All right, so the only difference was this is the one that I didn't have the sketch numeric input, didn't put a value in, and so this one's not set. As I move this one around, left click on the object, so in this case the endpoint that's free to move, you're seeing those little blue lines. And because it's horizontal, when I click on the line itself, it's limited in the direction that it can move, and that varies pretty much on what we're telling it. All right, so those only want to go, probably because of the horizontal, that seems to only want to go up and down because we can grab the endpoints, and as we drag those endpoints, left click, hold down, and drag, and as we make that drag, it's kind of controlling the left to right, where clicking on the line itself is just up and down. All right, so let's go ahead with adding another coincident. So I'm going to put that to the point. And so now we have the two coincidences, point 3 and point 1, and the point origin and point 3. All right, so we're not really keeping track of those. The software is keeping track of those for us, so we don't have to worry about them. But we do want to pay attention to our little blue dots and our little blue lines. Notice that the endpoint, as I hover over it, it is showing me what is available to select. It's also showing me where other items are, like the midpoint. But I can see here that that is a black endpoint and a blue endpoint, and that means that that is able to drag. So I am hyper focused on the little blue dots and blue objects in the sketch, because those are the things that can move. Those are the things that can cause problems with our sketch. All right, so if I drag that out, I can see an inference line. I can get kind of close, and that tells me that we're in a vertical orientation. Now, it does not apply that relationship. It's only showing me that there is an orientation there. If I want it to be vertical, then I would have to pick those objects, draw another line, go through some process to cause those to have a relation applied to them. So let's start with the select control select. I'm going to select the origin, which is also the point, which is also the endpoint. Whichever one it grabbed is fine. And I'm going to hold down the control button on the keyboard and hover over the endpoint of the other line. And when I have two little blue dots as my selected objects, I'm going to see the pop-up and make vertical. This one's going to be the fastest, is where that in context shows up at the cursor is always going to be fastest. But until you recognize the symbols and what they mean, the property manager is going to give you better description and be a little bit easier to work with. So we'll come over here, but I'm going to use both of those to add these relations. All right, so I go to move this, it moves, to move the line, it goes up and down. It does not move left to right. It has that vertical relation, and when I click on one box, it shows me its corresponding box or boxes, because we can have more than one relation applied depending on the type and what it's doing. So let's go into another line, and notice that when I highlight, we're getting the preview. I haven't turned those off yet. It also has the L in parentheses, which means if you like keyboard shortcuts, you can hit L on the keyboard. And it does the same thing. So our property manager comes up. I don't need to change anything. I give it a quick glance over here. And the as sketched means that I'm going to choose to either click click or click drag. So I want to close these the box off here. So I'm going to click and drag, and as I find that endpoint, it shows me what appears to be a concentric, but really will be a coincident, and it's also adding a vertical relation, and because it's in yellow, I'm going to see those. So there are a couple of relations that behave, I want to say strangely, and that would be one of them. We're kind of merging that point. So even though I know that I want that to say coincident, it shows me the concentric, and it does not show me a relation, but they are connected, and I can verify that by dragging that point around. All right, the other method then is the click. So if I click, let go, and then drag, then I can click. Because this one closes off and creates this region, it does not go continuous. Let's go ahead and get out of that. And to get out of the command, it says double click, but I always end up drawing little line segments whenever I double click. So we're just going to right click and select, or hit escape on the keyboard. So those are our two choices to get out of that, to get out of the command that we're in. All right, so coming back to a line that is now at an angle, when we go to apply dimensions, as long as our lines are parallel, it's going to give us a linear dimension. So let's just take a look at that real quick. I go in and I say I want a smart dimension. My first choice in the hierarchy is going to be the object. Okay, my preference. And when the modify box comes up, I'm just going to type in. I shouldn't have to click. I shouldn't have to select anything. In fact, it's probably better if you don't, because you'll probably end up overwriting the address at least some of the time. And you type in your dimension, hit enter, and it applies it. So let's see what happens when I go between two non-parallel lines. All right, that's going to give me my angle. So I'm going to escape just to get out of that real quick. And because the line was selected, it reverted back to the same dimension that I just applied. And maybe we'll go ahead and hit a Control Z, and a Control Z will put me back before I put that dimension in. And we can go to our second choice of dimensions. If I don't have a nice object geometry, then I can go between two objects and enter the value, type in the value and hit enter, and that will give us a value, and it updates in real time. All right, and then the last choice, let's see, if we wanted that to stay, well, let's just go ahead and Control Z it one more time. And then probably my least favorite, which there aren't very many issues with it, is to go from point to point, which if you are used to AutoCAD, you've got to make sure to set it. If it didn't pop up with the modify box and I start to type in a number there, I'm not going to do anything. I have to click and tell it where I want to put that dimension. So now that I've got that in place, one of the things that happens with points or lines that are gone, or that go from the endpoint, is that they can orbit. Right, so this will still be able to move and do some strange things, and there are times where even if I apply that dimension, and I don't have a good example right now, but if I were to apply by the points, this might still be able to move and affect other things, where if I go between a parallel, the parallel lines, then even if this one is set to horizontal and this one is not, but they're parallel, that dimension not coming up as an angle and putting in a value of 50 adds up to, or makes the jump that this will stay parallel. All right, so let's make this one a dimension, and we'll take a look at that real quick with putting a, if we go from the horizontal, we will get a full dimension. When we drag to the other side, we will get the adjacent, and then not sure which one that is, but we'll go get the another dimension, and whatever we decide to type in there. We don't really need 90, but that would make it perpendicular, which is one of the reasons we don't use perpendicular very much, is because the vertical in conjunction with a horizontal does the same thing. So as we start to get used to these relations and putting in and the values, let's just put in a 98 for instance. There are things that we can use combinations of different relations to tie these together, and if a horizontal is not convenient, then maybe a perpendicular and a coincident do the same thing in some type of weird way. All right, so looking at our screen, the visual clues is the shaded sketch contour. If I click on that, it's going to go away. Click on the shaded sketch contours icon, it comes back. There are times in the selection where we don't necessarily want that, so it is nice to be able to turn that off. So lines, let's go from corner to corner. And we have a thing called a construction line and a center line. In SolidWorks jargon, they pretty much mean the same thing. So if I need something for reference that doesn't participate in building a solid, I can go from endpoint to endpoint, or from midpoint. I just have to kind of hover over that line and wait for the midpoint to show up, and then go find another midpoint, which ought to be, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that'd still be horizontal. So midpoints, midpoints, and endpoint. All right, so whatever those do, that just gives me for reference, and also kind of breaks this region up a little bit, that depending on my selections, I can get some different results out of the solid if I really need it. All right, so we're going to go to circle. There's no little parenthesis next to that. That is set as a hotkey. So there is a little arrow that says you can do a circle perimeter and or circle center point and radius, and the perimeter circle, which is 3 points on the circle. That one doesn't come up very much, but it is pretty handy. All right, so same with the click drag and the click click. So let's do a click drag. So left click, hold down, and drag and let go. And then it's ready for the next point. Click, let go, and drag out to the point and click again. Basically the same same result. Whereas the line, if I do the click and the click, it goes around until I click click. And I'm, like I said, I'm not very good at that. I'm better at the click drag. So I just did a window pick, since I'm introducing a lot of these. Clicking, left clicking, holding down and going from left to right is a window crossing. It will select the object from, let's see, did I say that right? From right to left is a window crossing. From left to right is only what's inside the box, is an actual window pick. So a lot of times I'll just naturally go right to left, hit delete on the keyboard, those objects are gone. All right, so the circle will stay about the same size, and I'm going to purposefully make these different contours. So there is a midpoint, there is a midpoint, there is a midpoint, they coincident. All right, so depending on what we're reading on those little yellow boxes, we're going to get different results and different additions to the to our list of relations. If I just place it, well, it's still free to move. And if I come back over here and find that guy, then the other item that I would be interested in is tangency. When we have circles, if this circle touches a line at a single point, it is tangent. Problem with doing this is that is also zero thickness geometry. It's very hard for the software to calculate, meaning that it doesn't like it, and it's probably not going to do it. So if we bring this one over and put it at the same center, so concentricity, and that probably didn't show up when I did that. So let's drag over and see if it, so there's a concentric, And if I'm doing the select control select, we're going to get these relations if we click and drag, or if I do the select, hold down the control and do a select. All right, so coincident for the points. And if I go select on the perimeter of the circle and select on the perimeter of the circle, we will get concentric. We do not want to do co-radial because it's sharing the radius and the center, which means we're going to have duplicate objects. There's no real tool in SOLIDWORKS to tell you that they're duplicate objects. Just chances are the sketch will remain underdefined. So got to watch for that. So a lot of little rules that we're going to review again and again and again and see different ways to approach these. All right, so if I go with the concentric, that would be that one, or we come back over here and do that one. All right, so what I'm getting at or moving towards is, as I make this selection, that one was tangent, there we go. All right, so the circle is still in blue, and I want to go into my smart dimension. It is going to be my habit to right-click and go to the smart dimension, pick the perimeter of the circle in almost all cases. So once I put a dimension on that of 15, we're going to see the region, a nested region, and then a doubly nested region. So there's going to be some selections here when we go to make the extrude. But since we're just playing with the sketches, I'm not real concerned about the geometry. So to review real quick, our first relations are going to be coincident. See if we can get one of those up. Coincident, and then vertical, and a horizontal. And then we're going to see some the midpoint. And then also we'll start to pick up the midpoint and the tangency, which is why this circle did not need a dimension, is based on the geometry, the way that those were defined with the relations. That's what we get. If this geometry changes, which if I need to change a dimension, I double click on it, and if that goes to 100, it updates and I go, well, that went out a little ways, so maybe that one needs to go to 100 as well. And then, yeah, that'll probably make a mess out of that side as well. So we can play with those dimensions. We can do what if scenarios. We can see different results as we're going through the process. So play with the sketching. We'll concentrate right now just on those relations of coincident, horizontal, vertical, um, the midpoint, and the tangencies, and then relations also include dimensions. So when I pick that, it is going to show up in the display delete relations. Since I added those towards the end, I'm going to see distance, distance, and diameter. They are considered relations and part of the overall scheme of our sketching. And what we can do with these by having these contours and regions is be able to include or exclude geometry to make our sketches a little more efficient and create solids a little bit faster. So again, just a lot of introductory material, a lot of terminology, and getting into the methods of applying the relations and applying the dimensions.